Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Season's right around the corner. Finally, everything in my personal life is kind of starting to calm down. Repairs on the house are getting done so I can get back to making content. Tonight, we have got a ton to talk about. As always, I got Jance with me. Jance, before we hop into this, let the people know where they can find you and all the great content you make.
Yeah, man, y'all can find me on my Twitter, Jan716. Jan716. You can also find me on YouTube at Jan Sports. Normally, I upload some recruiting content, some posts, some previews, all the etc. When it comes to college football content, you guys can catch me on there. Also, Instagram at Jant's Sports as well. If you want to catch me, as far as getting into contact, I'm most involved over there, so you guys can catch me over there as well.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And hey, let them know about your stuff with Buffalo because you got some really exciting stuff there as well.
Yeah. So I joined the group called Buffalo Fanbase Sports. A lot of it's a mixture. You got some journalists over there. You got guys that are heavily involved in the media. Some other great content creators that cover Buffalo sports and just overall sports and just podcast with Kari Demos. He's a writer for Buffalo Fanatics. He also writes for UB. And also Fansided as well. So me and him, we do a podcast every Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard, 6 o'clock if you're on the Central Time. So it's been fun, me and him doing some fun projects over and over again. But yeah, that's where if you guys want to catch me over there, you guys can catch me over there at Buffalo Fanbase.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I got to hear about it every time. We got some people already in the chat. Norwooding, thank you for being here this evening. We're going to talk about your Sooners. There is a lot to talk about with Oklahoma. Recruiting, season expectations, and we're going to get to it. Nick Saban Jr. in the chat, always good to see you. You already know we got to talk about Alabama with the summer they had. Cody in here, thank you for joining us this evening, Cody. Once again, yeah, Oklahoma. I know why Oklahoma fans are excited. Y'all have good reason to be excited. Sam with the Roll Tide. Absolutely, my brother. Mark in here as a Texas fan. We're going to talk about some Texas as well because we got to talk about recruiting this summer. I think this is a perfect segue. Everybody's coming in saying their squads. Gents, ever since NIL hit, recruiting has just been crazy. Recruiting's always been crazy, but it just seems like this is a new layer of it. This summer in particular, I mean, how many big dominoes fell? Whenever you think about recruiting this summer, I got one question first. Who do you think, in your opinion, was the biggest piece to fall this summer? Who was the biggest win of the summer in terms of recruiting?
Maybe I'm a man by getting Caleb Downs and Richard Young, and the amount of 5-star talent that they were able to get over the summer. Especially because they were ranking. They once again ranked somewhere in the 30s and the 40s, and then all of a sudden the summer came. A lot of people were like, "Oh well, see, Saban can't recruit during the NIL process." A&M, again, they're about to take their surge. You see Texas, which again has done phenomenal. They're going to dominate, and all these other schools, especially with the Miami fans. And if shout out to all the Miami fans that are potentially in the chat. But man, Miami fans were going absolutely insane. Shout out to Canes Unfiltered, man, as far as dogging Alabama, as far as everything goes. But yeah, man. I mean, so you had a lot of schools that just were winning like absolutely crazy. But then you saw the month of July, I've always said July, August. That's when Alabama always turns up in recruiting, and that's where you start to see the 5-star stars and the 4 stars, and even get a lot of kids. And they went from
Oh, we may have lost Jance, but in the meantime, as he's talking about all the 5 stars everybody got, the reason why I wanted to lead with this is because I took some time today. I checked out who I believed were my top recruiting classes this summer. Now, I have some ways in how I did this. I looked at how many recruits you got from June till August. I looked at how many top 100 guys you got, how many 5-star, how many top 300, kind of weighed it all, plus the importance. We'll wait for Jance to get back in here, but the results were a little bit surprising. Mark, you're in here saying Arch Manning you think is your biggest win of the summer. I just don't know how you can dispute that. I think there's something absolutely to Jance's point. Caleb Downs is incredibly important to Alabama, but Arch Manning to Texas is incredibly symbiotic, right? It's symbiotic isn't the word. Symbolic is what I meant to say. Here we go. This is why you do it live. Arch to Texas is symbolic. Quinn Ewers ended up coming back, but it was still incredibly important to Steve Sarkisian that he be able to get in a top quarterback. He gets Quinn Ewers back from Ohio State and then Arch Manning. That is a huge win. I can't dispute that might not be the biggest domino to fall. But if we're talking about the top recruiting classes of the summer, go ahead and jot me in the chat. I want to hear your top 5 recruiting classes of the summer, because that's what I'm about to give you right now is my top recruiting classes of the summer. And I'm going to give you 6 because I have to give an honorable mention. My number 6 and honorable mention is going to be the Florida Gators. When we talk about Florida recruiting, the biggest barrier to Florida recruiting is being able to be successful in their own state. I mean, we have Texas fans in here. We have Oklahoma fans in here. We have Alabama fans in here. Each one of our respective institutions have been able to go into the state of Florida and pull out huge talent. Mark, here, you guys just pulled out Cedric Baxter. Nick Saban, we just pulled Richard Young. Oklahoma fans, y'all have really been very successful under Brent Venables at establishing a pipeline to Oklahoma thus far, and even more so when you have a linebacker like a Phil Picciotti transferred to IMG. That's just increasing your presence there. Jance is back in here, so perfect. So whenever I look at it, Florida has got to be my number 6, my honorable mention, because they got 9 top 300 recruits from June to August. That is incredibly impressive. On top of that, 8 of the 9 play high school football in the state of Florida. Remember what I just said. It's going to be incredibly important for Billy Napier to be able to lock down the state of Florida. If 8 of your top 9 signees during the summer months play in your state, you're doing something right. This is going to be big. It's going to be incredibly important to see how this war between Florida and Miami continues to rage in terms of recruiting, because they have been going back and forth. But the first barrier you have to be able to do is establish yourself in your own state. Now, it's going to be also incredibly important to keep those pipelines outside. So for Florida, you have 9 top 300 recruits signed through June to August and 12 total. So that's my honorable mention. Miami comes in at my number 5. The reason Miami comes in at number 5, they may not sign as many top 300s as Florida, signing 8 of the top 300, but they did sign a 5-star in Francis Mauanoa, the number 1 offensive lineman in the nation, phenomenally talented prospect, and another guy in Jaden Wayne, who I personally believe is a 5-star. I know he got bumped down to 4-star status. That guy is unbelievably gifted. I don't see how he's not a 5-star. So if any Miami fans in here want to argue, well, I think we have 2 5-stars. Depending on where you look, he is a 5-star, so you're certainly not going to have much pushback from me. I'm really fond of Jaden Wayne. I think he's an incredibly talented prospect. But on top of signing 8 top 300 prospects, 1 5-star, and then Jaden Wayne, they also had 6 top 100 guys. You cannot not be impressed by Miami and Mario Cristobal right now. I mean, it's a storybook. We talk about Oklahoma and how much sense it makes for Brent Venables to get there. And we're about to talk about the Oklahoma Sooners a bit more, because Brent Venables going back to Oklahoma makes a ton of sense in terms of the expectations. He knows what to expect. He's been in the building before. Mario Cristobal might not have that level of familiarity with the Canes program, but what he does have is that level of familiarity with Miami in and of itself. And that is incredibly palpable. Jance is back in here right now. So Miami comes in at my number 5 recruiting class for the summer. Number 4, we're going to go LSU. I think I just kicked him out accidentally. Yeah, I did. So number 4, we're going to go LSU. They signed 9 guys in the top 300 during the summer period, 14 total top guys signed through the summer period. Now, why is LSU so intriguing? What do we know about Brian Kelly? He's been successful at Notre Dame. He may not have had that barrier, right? Everybody wanted him to get past that playoff loss. They've never been able to do it. So he may not have ever been able to get over the barrier, but he's still a very established coach. LSU is also one of the most talent-rich states in the nation. So you have to give a guy like Brian Kelly the benefit of the doubt when you talk about how established he is, plus the talent in the state. And they've been able to do it really well. 9 top 300 guys from June until now, 14 total additions over the summer. I mean, and you're talking about wide receivers such as Shelton Sampson, a 5-star wide receiver. They were able to lock down and keep home. That's a huge win, cannot be understated. Now, coming in next is Georgia. Georgia had 8 top 300 guys. They've signed 11 guys over the summer, and I get it, right? They didn't sign as many as LSU, but if you look at the quality of player Georgia signed this summer, good gracious me. Their linebacking core is going to be something to watch for the future. Mark my words. And on top of that, yes, they lost out on a Caleb Downs. Yes, they've lost out on some in-state talent, more so than I think a lot of people expected. Certainly myself. I didn't see them missing on all these in-state guys. But they're not missing on their out-of-state prospects. And right now they're recruiting at a very, very high level. Because of that, it's very, very hard to ignore. Now, I've given you my honorable mention, which was Florida. I've given you my number 5, which was Miami. Then I've given you my number 4, LSU, my number 3, Georgia. Tied for number 2, I have 2 teams, right? Because I think either way you look at this, I could argue it either way. For number 2, we have a tie between the Oklahoma Sooners and the Texas Longhorns. How ironic is that we have the 2 bitter rivals tied for second? And I'm going to tell you why right now. Texas signed 17 players during the summer. The number 1 overall player in the nation in Arch Manning, and we saw an absolute avalanche happen after that. They signed 10 guys in the top 300. 2 5-stars, and 5 top 100 players in the nation. Now, I know people are already saying, but Texas always recruits well. You are not wrong. Texas always does recruit well. The only thing I can offer you is that they're recruiting to need as opposed to recruiting just to add a collection of talent. And there is a difference. May not be a large difference, but there is a nuanced difference between the two. Something to know. So Texas has been incredibly successful on the recruiting trail, but we cannot in good conscience ignore what Oklahoma has done on the recruiting trail. I mean, you talk about adversity. Whenever Brent Venables took this job, unknown was the word I would have for Oklahoma whenever he stepped into this because of how everything had gone down. Now, very quickly, we were taught what Brent Venables would do. When he signed a top 10 recruiting class in his first year and a top 10 transfer portal acquisition class, Jans, we've talked about it. It was hard to question Brent Venables after that. So I'm not surprised to see the run he's gone on whenever he was able to fix a glaring issue so quickly and make an uncertain situation certain. That's impressive. So I was not surprised. But Oklahoma has signed 15 guys this summer. They've signed 9 top 300 guys. Plus, Jance, they may not have had a 5-star during the summer portion. Jackson Arnold is their 5-star quarterback, but he didn't come through June to August. But if you want to tell me right now that you're going to consider Petaway a 5-star, you're not going to hear an argument from me. Yeah. Certainly, if you want to tell me that PJ Adeboorwe is a 5-star, you're really not going to hear an argument from me. That guy just started playing football. There's no question that guy's got a 5-star ceiling. There's no issue there.
Yeah.
He just green. He needs to learn. So,
and they're addressing the needs.
And he addresses a huge need. Plus, on top of that, I talk about they have 9 top 300 guys. The beautiful thing about Oklahoma is I can go down the list and look at some of their 3-stars, watch the way they play, go watch Clemson film and see, oh, that's a 1-to-1 fit. That's going to be a beautiful fit. They got a guy in their class right now that's a 3-star that I think is going to fit that Brent Venables cheetah position like a glove. I can't wait to see what he does. So, I mean, you look from top to bottom, you have guys outside the top 300 that are huge additions, such as a Keon Brown in Florida. Oklahoma recruiting has been nothing but impressive ever since Brent Venables came there. And Josh Pate pointed out something that must be repeated because it is that important. Brent Venables and company are on the precipice of something that Lincoln Riley never did, and that's sign a top 5 recruiting class. And for anybody in here that thinks that might not be possible, they might be able to do it, right? Like if you look at the battles they're still in, if they keep the guys they still have, if they win the battles they feel confident about, they're going to be right there, man. I mean, they're going to be right there. I see some people in the chat saying Notre Dame, the only reason Notre Dame isn't cracking the list is we are looking just at the summer from June till now. If we're looking in totality, that's another conversation. Actually, one we will hit in this live stream. My number 1, though, before I give it to Jance, it's not going to be surprising. It's Alabama. And I understand people might be sitting there saying, well, there's a level of bias there. But the reason I have that sign behind me is because you guys can hold me accountable, right? I want you all to know my bias so that way when you disagree with me, we can have a principled conversation as to maybe why and you understand. But hear me out. Before we have any conversation about my bias, hear me out. Alabama signed 3 5-stars this summer. As Jant said, Alabama was sitting in the 40s before the summer came, and now they're the number 1 recruiting class in the nation. They signed 16 total prospect, 11 top 300 guys, and guess what? In that 11, that doesn't include the number 1 junior college player in the nation, Malik Benson, and the number 2 junior college player in the nation, Justin Jefferson. So Alabama signs 11 top 300 guys, 16 total, 3 5-stars, and skyrockets 40 plus places up the recruiting board to number 1. I just look, I understand I'm an Alabama fan, but that's why I am very honest with you all, because I want you all to hold me accountable. I think there's a very good principled argument for Alabama to be number 1. When you look at Caleb Downs, the need they were going to have there, when you look at Richard Young, when you look at the cornerback signing of Tony Mitchell, this class for Alabama really, really was helped this summer, and I think it's only going to continue getting there. But Alabama comes in at my number 1 so quickly. Alabama's my number 1. Texas and Oklahoma share number 2, because I think you can argue it either way. One, Texas needs classes like this, so it's incredibly important for Steve Sarkisian, plus the win of Arch Manning. But in Oklahoma's favor, Brent Venables is brand new, never coached a game, and he's already doing this. You cannot ignore that. Coming in at number 3, we have LSU. Coming in at number 3, we have Georgia. Number 4, we have LSU. 5, we have Miami. And my honorable mention is Florida. Once again, guys, this is just for June through right now while we're having this conversation. Jance, I've talked for a long time about this. What's your thoughts on that right there? The list I just gave you. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, I think first of all, man, I think one of the biggest winners of the recruiting process. Well, I give it to Texas. I think Texas is not the biggest winner, but I definitely think that they're definitely a big winner in the recruiting process. Only, you look at some of the quality of players that they're able to get, especially getting a player like Cedric Baxter out of the state of Florida, which again, a lot of Miami fans, a lot of Florida fans, really wanted him. They kept talking about how they pretty much are now controlling the state of Florida. They got that lock, and Steve Sarkisian was able to go to an area that that recruiting wise was unfamiliar with, and was able to establish a staff that was able to go ahead and get one of the top running backs. And depending on what recruiting site you're using, I mean, I think Cedric Baxter was actually the number 1 running back on all 3. So that was a huge win for them. Getting Arch Manning over the summer, I mean, that's one of the, if not the biggest win of the entire recruiting process. And the fact that Texas is still in a maybe not for the summer, but potentially moving on to the fall. I mean, they're in a position to get at least 4 to 5 guys. So I look at the University of Texas and I look at their summer, and I feel like that was a really, really good summer. Alabama, of course, before kind of my stuff went off, for them, again, they are definitely the biggest winner. Again, I mean, the month of July over the last 2 to 3 years have just been an absolute, I mean, it's been incredible what Nick Saban is just able to do as far as just getting those amount of players in that month, especially because you look at that month of July. I mean, you look at guys like Francis and Caden Proctor and just some of their biggest targets, and Alabama couldn't land them, even though that they were in the top 5. So there was an immediate concern. Well, if you're not in Alabama, there was a lot of fans. They're celebrating if Alabama doesn't pick up some of the top guys. But there was a little bit of a concern that why isn't these Alabama picking up these kids? And then all of a sudden, here comes Richard Young. Here comes Caleb Downs. Here's the rest of these guys, Miles McVay. Alabama picking up, I think, around 3 to 4 offensive linemen in the summer alone. I mean, Alabama doesn't have to recruit another lineman again, and they will be absolutely fine. And that's just because of what they've been able to do. So, I mean, overall wise, the summer has been incredible. It's been incredible for the University of Alabama. Ohio State's kind of been quiet. I mean, but they've picked up some key pieces as well. They've been pretty quiet. The same thing with Georgia. They're 5th right now when as far as the recruiting rankings. But Oklahoma, man, picking up 15, that is impressive. That's very, very impressive from a first-year head coach, especially because the way that Brent Venables and that coaching staff was just able to do things, right? Kind of canceling scholarships if recruits that would take other visits elsewhere if they weren't really locked in with the program, and some other things that happened. And the fact that Brent Venables was still able to get 15 guys and be patient, and that really, I mean, he was going after guys, but his way of recruiting is far different from a Lincoln Riley. Like, it was not as aggressive, in my opinion, as what we've seen from Lincoln Riley, where it seemed like Oklahoma was in desperate need to get some potential players, where Brent Venables is like, we don't care, we don't care if you are a 5-star. We want players to buy into the program. So I feel like that's more of a cultural defining method that Brent Venables was able to instill, that a lot of the players were able to buy into, saying, okay, man, this guy's serious. This coaching staff, this is serious. Like, this is more, I'm not going to say Nick Saban like, but this is kind of more of a military, like a military, type of thing, man, where you really have to, you have to buy into the program. You have to buy into the process. And so I feel like, again, if you're an Oklahoma fan, you got to be extremely excited, not just for this recruiting class, but you got to be extremely excited for the future. Because if Brent Venables there was concern that, hey, can Brent Venables, can he get some of these top guys? Because, even Oklahoma has been extremely talented, they've never really climbed the top 5, inside the top 5 where they can join a league company. And by the time they get into those playoff games, all of a sudden there's a huge talent discrepancy. So Oklahoma, like you said, they're on their way. They're on their way to potentially get inside the top 5. Of course, you got to battle competition. But again, it's like, how long will Notre Dame last? Notre Dame is number 2 right now in recruiting, but how long will they last before they start to kind of slip up a little bit? Because we see the momentum that Georgia is having right now. Well, the fall, I think, is going to be a lot better compared to what it is going to be in the summer. The same thing with Ohio State. Texas continues to pick up some momentum. LSU is definitely picking momentum, especially by getting that kid Sampson, because now we're starting to see that LSU is starting to control their borders, which which last year was definitely more of an anomaly year, because you saw Ed Orgeron, the kind of just the absolute chaos which was going on in Baton Rouge. But typically, LSU starts to control their borderline, and with the amount of talent there and in other areas that we've seen that Brian Kelly really start to establish some of those recruiting routes there, we can see them potentially move up in others. So, how long will Notre Dame last at the number 2 position? So I definitely feel like Oklahoma is trending upwards to a point where they could potentially get inside that top 5, which would be, I think that would be the biggest win of this recruiting story. I mean, Alabama, we're used to them seeing number 1, the same thing with Georgia and Ohio State. We're not really used to seeing Oklahoma inside the top 5 in recruiting. I think that would be the biggest recruiting win out of this entire year.
Yeah, look, it's very hard to deny that, because you're talking about a first-year head coach, and I get it. He was there for a portion of last cycle, right, for the class of 2022, but a very small portion of that cycle. I mean, it was really his efforts that saved the class for the Oklahoma Sooners, which was when we knew, because, you talked about it here on the live stream with me. If we need to pull receipts, we can go back to December. We can go back to January, where you and I were talking about, he's already looking really good. We have faith in his ability to recruit. Yeah. But even then, it's different seeing in that sense and then seeing how successful they've been over the summer. It's been incredible to watch. It's been awesome. I still have people saying Notre Dame. Look, Notre Dame is recruited at such an elite level. The reason Notre Dame didn't make my list is because they signed 6 top 300 prospects during the summer, the same portion where I said everybody else. My honorable mention signed 9. So Notre Dame has had a great, great class. There is no shade to Notre Dame's class. But when I picked these 5 out for a reason. Really, I picked more than 5 out because I had an honorable mention and a tie, but I picked them out for a reason, because I think it's going a little bit under the radar how insane they've been. Now, Jance, it's interesting. You had a take just a second ago that almost lines up exactly with what Eddie says right here. Eddie, thank you for joining in the live stream. Everybody commenting, thank you for being here with us this evening. Drop us your questions. Drop us your list. Y'all already know we're pretty interactive in these. But Eddie says, OU should be 1 because Venables is brand new. Alabama does that every year. Eddie, look, there is a logic to this statement, right? Brent Venables is a first-year head coach. I have him tied with Steve Sarkisian, who's new at Texas, but has still been there a year. He's still been able to get some of his guys. Brent Venables hasn't coached a game yet, and he's already doing this. The pushback, Eddie, and I want to hear from you in particular, and I want to hear from chat, fair or unfair, there is a real thing for Bama fatigue, right? Like, people are tired of seeing Alabama on top, and still, even through Bama fatigue, even through so many coaches who negative recruit Nick Saban more and more every year, this is going to be the year he retires. This is going to be, how many times have we heard Jant's stories of, oh, well, this prospect was told Saban's going to retire. There are entire pitches dedicated to Saban retiring. So, Eddie, you're not wrong, but I want to hear fair or unfair. The reason why I still give Alabama the edge is because numbers-wise, they've had the most impressive class this summer, just from an actual numbers, what they've actually pulled. But secondly, they've been able to withstand Bama fatigue, which I think is incredibly, incredibly impressive. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like you said before, man, I mean, it happens every single year. I mean, people always have to kind of question Nick Saban, as far as, can he make these adjustments, especially during the recruiting process? I remember going all the way back to, I want to say 2013. I would say 2013, after the 2012 year when Alabama won the national championship. But this is what, because they lost Johnny Manziel, a lot of schools actually use that game against Saban as far as the recruiting process goes, because they say the way that you see the way he played against A&M, you see the way how his methods are it's not going to work in the long term. That classic kind of pro style system, classic base 3-4. With you see how big those guys on the defensive line are, but we can use your size, we can use your athleticism, we can use your speed. Come to our university, and then what did Nick Saban do? He decided to kind of adjust his play. He didn't go for the 350-pound, 360, the Mount Cody's or the Jesse Williams. He went for the Deron Paynes, the Ashawn Robinsons of the world. And so so that you look at that, then you look at the spread. The concepts, how Nick Saban was able to adapt that after being criticized, that he can adjust with the times, the transfer portal. And now we have the NIL period where it's now every school can use NIL. So Nick Saban, as far as those chargers and whatever, and the jewelry and whatever crap that people like to make up, now all of a sudden he's at a disadvantage. Nick Saban continues to prove them wrong over and over and over again. So yeah, you're right. It is Bama fatigue, and you will see anything. People will use anything as far as trying to use a potential tool to out-recruit Nick Saban. But at the end of the day, we talked about this before. Nick Saban is the GOAT for a reason. It's his ability to adapt in any sort of situation. He can make those adjustments. And you're starting to see right now that even despite all the criticism that he's gotten over all of this offseason, as far as the whole Jimbo Fisher, Jackson State thing, where a lot of people thought that Nick Saban was just kind of bad mouthing, and that he was just kind of sick because, he can't adjust to NIL. And you saw that A&M based off, what great historic recruiting class, and Jackson State was able to get some great players as well. But Nick Saban was, whether if you agree with this take or not, he was trying to make a point, which Nick Saban, I hate to say it, normally is right. And look what happened. He got criticized for it, and he couldn't make these quote unquote adjustments. So it is what it is. It happens every single year. You're right. It is Bama fatigue. There's always got to be some sort of excuse, for why Alabama why Alabama is going to be on the decline. We see it every year, and we'll see it during the regular season, right? If Alabama, God forbid, if they lose a regular season game, what happens? It's on Sports Center for 2 weeks. It's on Sports Center. It's all over the world for 2 to 3, at least for about a couple weeks. The fatigue is real. And, unfortunately, it's going to happen until Nick Saban eventually retires.
Matt, if Brandon and Joe, is this the question? This one right here, Matt, let me know. Drop in the chat, because if that's the question you want talked about, we'll talk about it. Look, I completely agree. There's a reason why I still had Alabama at number 1, because look, this is the last time I'm going to say it. There is simply no pushback. There is no planet where the argument holds weight that what Brent Venables is doing right now isn't incredible. There's a reason why you look at the rate Oklahoma fans are interacting on Twitter, on YouTube. You look at the social media, it's jumping. Why? Because there's a palpable excitement. Now, Oklahoma's always been great on social media, but this is different. And deservedly so. What he's doing is fantastic. And I like what you said earlier about it almost being modeled. I think the best way to put it is it's being modeled off of a Clemson or an Alabama, right? He's been in positions where he knows what success looks like, and he's been at Oklahoma. He can merge all that he's learned in his time, and that's why I think he's able to hit the ground running. Now,
can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
So I'll say this real quick just to address Brandon Smith's kind of point a little bit. Miami was probably the most talked about team as far as recruiting wise from the summer. Like they were always in the headlines. I mean, you go to Twitter in the spaces, the Canes Unfiltered chat. I mean, all the Miami fans. I mean, there was a point where they actually were nationally trending because of just the noise and the recruiting, getting players like Jaden Wayne, getting Francis, and just for the most part, right? Miami has locked down, quote unquote, locked down the state of Florida. But Oklahoma picking up 15 dudes, no one really talks about it. No one really expects it. And again, even though Mario Cristobal, again, what he's doing with the state of Florida and just recruiting and getting the amount of talent, it's extremely impressive. But what Oklahoma has to do, because they're not really locking down their area. Like we've seen players from their state go to elsewhere, but they're going into other different locations, especially in Texas, when the Longhorns and A&M has all the momentum, and they're still getting and they're not just getting kids, they're getting players, they're getting the talent in areas where they need the most. They're locking down players in the trenches. They're locking down, they're getting guys in the secondary. They're getting skill position players. Like they're addressing the needs, which is something that Texas has failed to do. I mean, Texas has had top 3, top 5 recruiting classes, even throughout the entire drop process. But yet Texas were still going. I mean, they went 5-7 last year. Why? Because they didn't get the players. They didn't get the players that they needed the most. They didn't get players in the trenches. They were so focused on other skill positions and other areas that they didn't really address the weaknesses of their team. Oklahoma is doing that. So, I mean, as great as what Miami has been able to do in Florida and a lot of other teams were able to do that we didn't talk about, what Oklahoma has done with again, addressing their need again, they're not just getting the quantity, they're getting the quality of player. They're getting players that are really trying to buy into the process and buying into what Brent Venables and Todd Bates and the rest of that coaching staff is trying to do. So that's why, in my opinion, I think if Oklahoma continues to do what they do, I think despite what their ranking is, and I think they'll be 6, maybe potentially inside the top 5, I think they'll be the biggest win.
Absolutely. And look, there's a reason why I had Oklahoma ahead of Miami. And look, everybody who watches my content, I've been very high on Mario Cristobal when he was at Oregon, right? Maybe too high on Mario Cristobal when he was at Oregon. I remain high on Mario Cristobal when he goes to Miami, and I've been very, very forthright in my excitement for the Canes. I believe in what's going on there, but I could not in good conscience put Miami above Oklahoma. There's a reason why Texas, I mean, we talk about it, Texas
and they're
signed 7. Yeah, they're ninth.
Like, despite everything that happened with like how great it was, and everyone talked about, Oklahoma is out recruiting them.
They're out recruiting them. Now, Cody, I don't know about this quote. I haven't seen it. Unless you've seen it, I'm not going to speak on it. I apologize. I just don't want to speak on something I haven't read, I haven't seen, because then I'm going to be misrepresenting points, and I just don't think that's a great place for me to be. I don't want to give misrepresented points. So unfortunately, I did not see that. Jansen, if you saw it, I'll let you speak to that. But if it was said, look,
I never heard about
blue blood. I don't think any blue blood can really set someone up to fail. But there might be deeper implications there. Maybe I don't know, but I don't want to speak on something that I could possibly misrepresent. So, but it's interesting, man. You bring up Texas, because for me, the question was like, who do I put over who, Texas or Oklahoma? And I decided to put them as a tie because there's so many ways we can look at this. People in the chat saying Oklahoma should be here. None of you are wrong. There's logical ways to argue any of these. I just think from all standpoints, though, what these classes have done has been incredible. Now, Brock, I do want to address this. Brock says Cole Adams is from Oklahoma and he chose Alabama. You got to lock down in-state talent. Brock, you're not wrong. I talk about it with Florida all the time, how Florida has let talent leave their state at an alarming rate. But you're not going to win all the battles in your state. You're just not. Right, and we're Alabama fans. Brock, you're a Bama fan. Jance, Bama fan. Me, Bama. Peter Woods is on his way to Clemson. Unless we can do something to stop that. Justin Ross left, right? So you're not going to win all the battles in your state. It's about winning the battles you need to win. And if you lose a battle, can you afford to lose it? in the question of Cole Adams, I have no doubt that Oklahoma fans would love to have Cole Adams a part of that class. He is very, very talented. He's a guy I think is going to rise up the board. But how do they answer it is the question I would ask, Brock. And the answer to that is they get a guy who arguably is a top wide receiver this year in Petaway, right? Like, depending on what you value at the wide receiver position, they lose on Adams, they go get Petaway, who's phenomenally gifted. So Oklahoma has done fine. They've been very good at locking down talent in their state. So I think that's huge. We have people in the chat talking about Todd Bates and Chavis are great recruiters. John, I don't know if you saw back in, Gents, do you remember when I did that video? Was it February or January when I was talking about how Miguel Chavis was a name to know? And we did the whole live. And I had a whole spiel.
I think that was in February. I could be wrong, but I think that was in February.
That's a dude. That's a dude to know. Absolutely a dude to know. Absolutely a dude to know. But we got to move forward now. We got to talk, instead of recruiting, camps are open, man. Camps are open. There's a lot that teams need to prove this year. So let's start in the Big 12, man, because in the Big 12, you have the Texas Longhorns trying to correct the season they just had, trying to actually go somewhere. Then you have Oklahoma trying to really establish their first year under Brent Venables. You have Baylor trying to maintain, Iowa State trying to replace, Oklahoma State much in the same place trying to replace. What are your expectations for the Big 12 as a whole this year?
I think it's going to be a dogfight. I think it's going to be, I really think it's going to be a down year. I think all teams are going to be missing something extremely important. I think Oklahoma State is going to be missing the vast amount of experience that was on their offense and that was on their defense. I think for Baylor, I think, again, they lost some of their, the trenches, again, they're probably going to have the best offensive. No, they are going to have the best offensive line in the Big 12. Defensive line is going to be really nice too, even though they're going to miss some pieces. But, again, you return Siaki, who might be a potential first round pick, could be the next Vita Vea type of player. I mean, that was a kid I wanted when he came out of Orem. He came out of East High School from Utah. Kid was an absolute stud. But again, so Baylor for the trenches, they're going to be great. But then again, you look at all that NFL production. You lose your best receiver and Ty Thornton, who, shout out to him, he actually caught a touchdown for the Patriots. So shout out to him. But then you lose Jalen Pierre. That was arguably their best defensive player. You lose Terrell, who's with my Bills. They lost a lot of their best players, and we've talked about this before. But as great as a coach as Dave Aranda is, and as great as that staff, and what he's done about instilling his philosophy to that team, at the same time they don't have the same talent level as an Alabama, as a Georgia, as some of the even top tier schools. LSU, Ohio State, even a Michigan, even they don't really have that talent. So again, it's 100% coaching right now, and until they really do get that talent over there at Baylor, it's going to be a little bit of a tough time going through a process. Again, a lot of those guys were juniors and seniors, and now you have to kind of try to restart that. Iowa State, they lost a lot of production, especially, definitely an underwhelming season for Iowa State. They lost, again, you look at their offense, some of their best offensive players are now out. So you have to try to replace that production. Really, again, Texas, skill position players are nice, but then you look at their defense, it's not good. Again, I watched, shout out to Fanatic Perspective. I watched him and Karen with their live, and they were just addressing the defensive side of the ball. How, again, offensively, the skill position players are definitely there. You look at Xavier Worthy, Jatavion Sanders, Jaleel Billingsley, we're going to have to see, but it seems like Jatavion Sanders is going to be that number one guy. We all know Bijan Robinson with Roshan and Keelan, and we can go on. They got Isaiah.
The skill position at Texas is arguably the deepest in the nation. Yeah, yep, no doubt.
They are completely stacked. But then there are the concerns with, and we talked about this before, with the offensive line, the youth there with Devin Campbell and we don't even know if Kevin Banks is going to start. But the offensive line is going to be a question mark. The defensive line, we don't know how that's going to be, because that was it's just underwhelming. Byron Murphy, for the most part, I think should be the starter over Coburn. But we don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know who are going to be the pass rushers coming up the team, especially losing one of their best players as far as pass production goes. It sucks that Ben Davis, even though he wasn't the best, but the fact that he led the team in sacks with 2.5, Ben Davis. That's insane. Yeah, their secondary their secondary again is still a question mark, even though they got some talent there. So I look at all the top teams. They all have their questions? Even Oklahoma, right? Losing a lot of guys to the NFL, losing a lot of players to the transfer portal, especially going to USC. So, it's like it's a bunch of new regimes. It's trying to replace the amount of production that that a lot of these teams lost, and it was a lot of production. That's why I think it's open season. I think anybody can take it. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Kansas State. If Kansas State potentially could potentially be in that conversation to potentially compete for a Big 12 title. I mean, I think that it is open season for that conference right now. I don't think that there really is one standout team. And last year, a lot of people, including myself, we chose Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, I even chose them to make the playoffs.
Same.
Yeah, just because the amount of production. You had that amount of production returning back, and the way that, and again, their defense wasn't elite, but it was great. It was a really good defense in 2020. So that was the easy choice to pick. For this year, I have no clue, because I think that each and every single team has they have their strengths, but it's also huge holes that we just have to see, whether if it's replacing an entire coaching regime or if it's just replacing the amount of production that a lot of these teams lost. So it's open season. I think anybody can take it, honestly.
Completely agree. And this is why I've maintained for so long. It's so unfortunate how things happened for Oklahoma, right? Like, you never, for any school, right? Even if Notre Dame was in the Big 12, the way Brian Kelly left Notre Dame is not the way you want to leave a team, right? Where you basically have to be brought in to say your goodbyes instead of doing it on your own accord. I digress. This year is probably the best year that could have happened, because top to bottom, the Big 12, the word I have for the Big 12 this year, chaos. Write that down. Because when I look top to bottom, Jance put it beautifully. I'm not going to spend long on it. Where are we sure? Okay. Well, I'm sure I like Oklahoma's future with Brent Venables, but it's a future I'm unsure of. What does it really look like? I need to see, but I'm very excited to see, right? Because I do have some assuredness that it's going to be positive. I'm interested in Texas. I'm sure they're going to be a better team, but how much better, right? How much better? Their offensive line starts some new guys. Now, some of those freshmen, look, they're freshmen, y'all, but sometimes we've seen freshmen come in and play great. It's not unheard of, and they got some very talented guys. So it could happen. Granted, they're going to be thrown to the wolves, especially week 2. You're talking about going up against Dallas Turner and Will Anderson. You're literally getting thrown to the wolves, but they'll be better for it. But even then, if Texas figures out their offensive line, they still got to figure out their defense. Now, I think, Jance, you'll agree with me. I feel much better about Texas if they figure out an offensive line and they can consistently drop 45 points a game, because then it's like, okay, well, you just have to score with them. We've seen high-powered offensive teams be able to make it with a lackluster defense, but that's not what Texas wants to be. Oklahoma has some assuredness, but even then, to your point, they lose some big-time guys to the NFL. Now, do I like the depth they have on the back end? Yes, I do. I very much will. But Clayton Smith is a guy who I don't think has gotten the noise and attention I thought he would to this point, but he's still very, very talented. Like, you look, there's a lot to be excited about, but I still need to see how it comes together. So the Big 12 is ripe for the taking. And it brings me to this question right here. Let me see if I can go back up and find it. If I can't find it, I know exactly who asked it. Brandon Smith asked me if I believed that the Oklahoma Sooners could make the college football playoffs this year. Brandon, I think my answer is here it is. I don't think so. No, because when I look at Alabama, I think they're way too established. I look at an Ohio State, I see a team that is way too established. Even a Utah, with what Kyle Whittingham has been doing up there, I mean, that's an established team. And I think Oklahoma is building. But am I saying it's impossible? Absolutely not, because you're very talented. I think you're going to be very well coached, and I think there's an opening in the Big 12. I just wouldn't bet on it. Jance, what's your thoughts on that?
When I take a look at some of those teams in the Big 12, especially a team like Oklahoma, it's like, even though as much as we raved so much about this coaching staff, at the same time, man, I mean, when you have to, the offensive line was a weakness for that team, and you have to replace, I think, around 2 or 3 guys in the offensive line.
You better replace guys there, yeah.
yeah, you got to replace all that production there. Receivers wise, I mean, we like Theo Weiss, we like Marvin Mims, but there are some other guys. What's the running back situation? What's the running room looking like? That, you know, we
better than last year, but still, point taken. Yeah.
It's just, you know, so what's going on with there? The defense, like defensively, I mean, you lose two of your top tier pass rushers, including Perion Winfrey from the interior, which that was a weak point for your team, was that interior defensive line. What's going to happen there? I mean, Jalen Redmond, I think Reggie Grimes has the potential of being that potential pass rusher, but we don't know. We really don't know yet. I mean, their secondary, like you said before, I'm confident that I think their secondary can make some improvements. But it's like each team in that conference has either lost extremely important coaching staffs, or they've lost the amount of production. I mean, Oklahoma State, they lost the experience, and they lost, that defense was the biggest reason why. It was the defense that was the reason why they made it to that Big 12. Even then, they were in so many close games. Losing Jim Knowles and losing the amount of experience, losing the side that got you to that title game. I mean, do we expect the offense just take a massive jump and potentially get that team there? I don't know. I mean, Baylor, it's the same thing. I mean, you lose some of your best players that have been around there for 4 to 5 years. Now we just expect Baylor to just immediately replace that amount of production when they don't have the talent level yet. I mean, we don't know. I mean, they have to groom their players. They have to bring them up a little bit. So it's just, each and every single team in that conference has so many major question marks. That honestly, I don't know if this is considered a hot take, but it wouldn't surprise me at all that the Big 12 winner has 3 losses. I would just not surprise me at all. I think that we potentially see some upsets. Again, I think Kansas State, that's my dark horse team to win the Big 12. I think with the amount of production that's coming back for them, especially from a pass rushing standpoint on the defensive line, I forgot what his name is, but they actually have a player on the defensive line that's a projected top 15 pick. Maybe someone in the comments can tell me about it, but for the most part, I look at them and I think that they have the opportunity of potentially upsetting and maybe be that dark horse to win that conference. I mean, I think that conference has so many question marks compared to any other conference. I look at the ACC. Again, as weak as the conference is, they have Clemson. That even though with their down year, they still won 10 games, and that was just because of quarterback play, right? That's an issue. If they can just have a serviceable quarterback. Right, they didn't even have a serviceable quarterback. If they can just have a serviceable quarterback, they're probably losing one. They're probably losing one game in that entire conference. The SEC, we all know who the big dogs are. The Big Ten, we know who the big dogs are. The Pac-12, we have Oregon and UCLA, and there are some strong teams. There's some strong contenders, but USC is the favorite. The Big 12, I have no clue. That conference, I have no idea what's going on, because it seems like they all have something in common, which are losing the biggest strengths of what got them in the position that they were last year. And even then, I mean, the Big 12 conference winner had a couple losses. So I don't know. It's just, it's something that we're just going to have to see.
Yeah, look, no. And Brandon, here's the thing though. This is a sentiment I've heard echoed by quite a few people. And I think it's a very real possibility, right? Like, Jance isn't the first person. I mean, I've heard a lot of people echo this sentiment, and it is realistic because look, I think right now we're confusing saying, oh, we don't know if OU might be able to make it to a playoffs in year 1 under Brent Venables, with saying OU's season isn't going to be successful. And that's not the take at all. What we're saying is Oklahoma still has a lot they have to replace. You bring in great coaches. I love Todd Bates. I love Miguel Chavez. I mean, Brandon, you know how high I've been on them, but they still have to get guys there. They still have to get guys acclimated. So I'm more sure of Oklahoma than I am a lot of teams in the Big 12, but I'm still unsure of the Big 12 as a whole. That's what I think my biggest question will be. And look, a 2-loss is realistic, but I don't think that a 3-loss Big 12 championship is out the realm of possibility, right? Because there's going to be a lot of new. It's going to be a great season in the Big 12. It really is. And Danny, look, you're not wrong. Here's my question, though. You're not wrong, because from an offensive weapon perspective, Texas is arguably the most powerful team from an offensive weapon perspective. When we're talking wide receiver, running back, tight end, I mean, they're in a list where you're talking about them with 4 or 5 other teams. I mean, how many other teams would you put up on par or comparable, Jance, with what they have in those departments? Ohio State, Alabama, USC with the addition of Jordan Addison in them. But I mean, and look, Oklahoma's got a great wide receiver room too with Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss. I love LV Bunkley Shelton. I think that was a great pickup from Arizona State. But we need to see. The question, Danny, is if the offensive line doesn't come together, that's going to be what stops UT's offense, is the lack of being able to control. Go ahead.
Yep, and that's my point. And again, that's why, even though again the possibility of a team winning, of a team losing 3 games and win their conferences, it's not that crazy. I mean, we've seen Power 5 conference teams do it before. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, Alabama did it in '99. I mean, that's just coming top of my head, but we've seen it happen. It's possible. And when I look at this conference, they all have the same issues. The top power teams have all had the same issues. It's either losing that coaching regime that got them there, or it's losing the amount of production that got them there. Oklahoma State, it was their defense was the reason. Baylor, it was because it was their best players like Ty Thornton, their quarterback. Losing your running back who was a 1,500-yard rusher, you lose him off to the NFL draft. You look at Jalen Piet-Perry, look at Terrell. Those leaders, those guys, those alpha males are gone from that Baylor team. And now we're just expecting that they can just immediately replace that production, like they're not going to have at least some sort of hiccups in the beginning of the season. Oklahoma, too, with the amount of production that you lost on the defensive side of the ball. And also, too, you lose a lot of talent to the transfer portal. Do we expect Oklahoma not to have issues in the beginning or even to the midseason? I mean, because, again, it's continuity. You got a lot of transfers that I think that are going to have a big opportunity to play. But, again, it's not that easy, right? As far as learning the system, as far as getting everything down, there's going to be some hiccups that every single team in that conference is going to have to struggle with. That's why I have Kansas State as a dark horse, because they have a lot of returning talent coming back. The coaching regime is perfectly safe, and they also have they have quality NFL talent, even a couple players that are projected first-round picks. That's why I got Kansas State as a dark horse. I think that every single team will struggle. I think that every single team, for the most part, will definitely come across hiccups. I just, again, I don't think it's that crazy of a take that if a team wins the Big 12 championship at 10-3. To have a 10-3, maybe entering a bowl season and have the opportunity to win 11 games. Virginia Tech did it before. That's another name that just came to me. They did it before in the past. So again, the Big 12, it's also in a way complementing the conference, because it's also a conference that if we take a look at history, that's what they're known for, knocking each other off.
Very true.
The competition in that conference, it's very underrated. Like we talk about the Big 10, we talk about the SEC. But when you look at that Big 12, when these teams play each other, it is on. These teams, it's competitive every week to a point where anybody can get upset. We've seen it so many times happen in that particular conference. So that's why, in my opinion, again, it would not surprise me at all if a team enters if a team wins the Big 12, they're 10-3 by the end of it. It would not surprise me.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. The Big 12 is always such an interesting case, why I wanted to talk about it this evening in particular, because it's so chaotic, and we're going to revisit this topic multiple times, especially as more information comes out about camp. I do kind of want to talk lightly about the Pac-12 and what you're expecting there. Do you think USC has a legitimate shot at a run at it this year? Because when I look at it, USC, they have some weapons to be able to really hurt some people. But I look at Utah, man, and I never think Utah gets the respect they deserve. What are your thoughts there?
So here's the thing about this. So I have a crazy take. I have a crazy take that I'm actually going to do a video on. I think USC is going to lose to Fresno State. I think Fresno State's going to upset them, and I think that's going to be all over ESPN. That's going to be all over headlines. I think USC, for the most part, I think they're gonna deal with something that Miami had to deal with in 2019, because a lot of people forget that. In 2018, Miami had a phenomenal transfer portal full of talent, great pool. But they had a lot of success. Matter of fact, they actually went on to the AC Championship game. But the next year in 2019, it was even better. The talent pool was actually a lot better in 2019, and then the same thing happened in 2020, where they had all this talent pool full of transfers. And then look what happened. Their program imploded. Their program absolutely imploded. Coaches were fired. We all know what the story of Manny Diaz, all that. I mean. So I think USC is going to deal with a very similar issue as far as I'm not saying they're going to, their program is going to implode, but when you have that many transfers, that many guys that are coming from different programs that had to do, that had their own egos, or maybe had to, again, adapt to other different, certain situations, you now have to come into a USC fresh program. We don't know how the culture is. We don't know what Lincoln Riley said over there, because he's coming from Oklahoma. So he's trying to bring his thing. He's trying to bring his culture, and he's trying to instill it with these young guys. A lot of these guys that are 21, 22, some of them are 23 years of age, that this is their first year. They don't know USC. Maybe they're still trying to figure out what's going on with their campus. So I think that from a continuity standpoint, I think that for the most part, they're going to struggle earlier on in the season. I love USC as far as their talent. There's no questioning. I mean, USC is stacked as far as their skill position players. Jordan Addison, Biletnikoff winner. I mean, Mario Williams is a transfer over there. I forget what his name is, but Gary Bryant Jr. from Centennial, I think, is a guy that could potentially break out for them as well. I mean, they got guys. I mean, you got Troy Dye, who had over 1,500 yards from Oregon. He's going to be there. The offensive line was one of the, well, a lot of USC fans will say it, but they had one of the best offensive lines in their conference, but defensively was a liability. Still, you bring in Shane Lee from Alabama, who a lot of USC fans are raving about, but at the same time, it's not like Shane Lee was a killer at Alabama. I mean, he started in 2019, and a lot of people bring that up, but he started not because he was the best player. He started because we lacked depth. He was the last line of defense, and so we had no choice but to start Shane Lee at inside linebacker. He didn't do a bad job. I mean, freshman, and he still did a pretty good job. And I thought he still did a pretty good job. But for the most part, I mean, he was not one of the best linebackers, that's for sure, at the University of Alabama. And now he was on the bench ever since, either as a special teams player or as a guy that would occasionally come in. So you now have to kind of deal with that. USC from a talent standpoint, they're really, really good. But I think from a continuity standpoint, that's something that I think they're going to struggle with a little bit early, a little bit late. And again, every team in that conference is going to have their problems. I think UCLA, they had a very experienced team last year. And now you lose a lot of those guys, right? So now you have to kind of replace that talent. They still got some pieces that I think that UCLA can end up winning around 7-8 games. And again, Zach, they got their quarterback. Zach Charbonnet is going to be back. But then all of a sudden, again, Oregon. I think a lot of people are writing Oregon off. And again, Oregon did lose, but they still got that talent is still there, man. I think a lot of people are underestimating Oregon and just how good of a team that could potentially be. Matter of fact, Dan Lanning's philosophy and everything that he's trying to spout, it's not that different from Mario Cristobal. I actually think they're very, very similar, actually. And I think just hearing from a lot of these Oregon guys and very similar to what's going on with Oklahoma, where the culture has not changed. It's not been negatively impacted. Matter of fact, it's actually been a lot better from what I've heard from Oregon fans. Now that could just be because they don't want to talk bad about their program. But from what I've heard, I mean, yeah, like Oregon, a lot of these guys, they love the direction that Dan Lanning's taking this program going to. So I think the talent-wise, I think they still have it there. I mean, we talk about all the time with Justin Flo. If he can stay healthy, that's his. But if Justin Flo and Noah Sewell, if those guys, that could be one of the best linebacking duos in the nation. I like their defense. What's coming back to them. I think Oregon's a team that a lot of people are definitely writing off a little bit. Utah, of course, is going to be the favorite, but I have questions about Utah, more particularly about their defense, because they did lose some of their top premier players, especially losing a player like Devin Lloyd. But Utah, with Cam Rising and a lot of those guys returning back, I think is obviously going to be the returning favorite. But I feel like, again, I think there's going to be a little bit more competition not just in the Pac-12, but USC as a whole. Looking at their schedule, there are some schools that I'm looking at, and I'm like, they can catch them. And Chris, he loves to point this out, but Lincoln Riley has an issue of dealing with teams that he's not supposed to lose to. He's always had this sort of issue throughout, pretty much his entire reign over there. So I look at USC. I think they're going to struggle a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to get absolutely blown out. I am making my hot take of choosing Fresno State to upset USC, not because I want that to. Well, I do want that to happen. That would be hilarious. But at the same time, I think that they're going to deal with issues that I think just like how I kind of talked about with Baylor, with the Oklahomas and the Texas of the world, USC will also deal with those same similar issues as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And one thing, Matt back here, he says that he can't get over the take about the Big 12 champion having 3 losses. We're not saying, look, nobody ever said that's what it's going to be. We said we wouldn't be surprised if that's happening, because the Big 12 has so many teams reaching for that next level. It's going to be a really competitive conference. And a lot of people are going to sit there and say, oh, the Big 12 is not going to. The Big 12 is going to be a very competitive conference. Look, I think USC is going to be an incredibly interesting team within the Pac-12 this year. I think their future is bright, but I look at it. I wonder what their defense is going to be able to do, right? They did get in an addition that I love, and that's Eric Gentry. That's one of my favorite additions out the transfer portal. Eric Gentry transferring from Arizona State to USC. That dude right there, I think, is going to be a great player. I think we're going to be talking about him halfway through next year, and man, that's going to be just a great, great player. Loved that they got him. But other than that, I think USC is in a position where they just, almost like Texas, Lincoln Riley steps into a situation where he's got a lot to build, right? He doesn't step into a situation like Brent Venables, where it's a very established program. Oklahoma, I mean, you get a coach in there, it's ready to go. USC is not that program right now, right? Like, he's got to build some of the damage that's been done to that program and has to implement it into his style, whereas Venables already has that expectation, right? Whereas Dan Lanning, even first-year head coach, Oregon is in a much better position than USC. Now, does that mean they will always be in a better position? No, we know the brand USC can be. We know what USC can be when they're clicking. They're a national brand, and they're going to be just fine. But it's the ability to work through it, right? We need to give Lincoln Riley some time because it's been a while since USC was where they needed to go. Now, we're not saying they will. We're saying that the conference is so competitive that they could have 3 losses, right? Because what's West Virginia going to do? We still need to see. There's just so much movement inside the Big 12. Someone asked me something earlier. They said right here, they said, everyone OU is lost. They've replaced with people better or just as good. Look, I love the people OU's replaced with, right? Like, I love the additions in the transfer portal, but we still need to see what that all looks like when it comes to fruition, because you're talking about Nick Bonito, right? Like, that's not
Perrion Winfrey. Like, are you saying that there's someone on that roster right now that's better than Nick Bonito and Perrion Winfrey? I mean, maybe Reggie Grimes for Nick Bonito, but for Perrion Winfrey?
Maybe. Look, I don't know the answer.
I mean, maybe. I don't.
We need to see. But I think Perrion is so good. I just can't say like, oh yeah, that guy's going to be definitely better. Now that being said, Braden, I do largely agree with the spirit of what you're saying here, right? It's that, yes, Oklahoma lost people, but they got in very talented pieces. I very much well do agree with the spirit of that. But other than that, yeah, I think that's just about it. Brandon, once again, man, we're saying that Oklahoma, very talented. I think y'all could be in the Big 12 championship, but you also have to go play a rival game this year in Nebraska. You're also dealing with bringing in some new pieces. Nebraska's on their last leg. Like, they got to win this year with Scott Frost, or that could be Scott Frost's job. They're coming with everything.
Yeah.
So we got to see. Spaceman says, Jeffrey, yeah, I did a whole video on Jeffrey Johnson and Jonah Luulu because I love who they and look, Jeffrey Johnson, very, very talented. You watch that Tulane. Go check out the All 22 on Jeffrey Johnson. Boy, that's a dog right there. That's a dog. So yeah, look, Oklahoma, they're going to have a very difficult season ahead of them, not because they're not talented. It's just because you got a schedule where you're playing some rivalry games, and it's going to be a lot of fun, right? I mean, I think Oklahoma, I see 10-2 for Oklahoma because I do think they're in winnable positions. I think 9-3 isn't out the realm of possibility, but I've said I think 10-2 for Oklahoma is what they need to be shooting for, and if they hit 10-2, that is a huge, huge, huge overall success, right? Like, that's a huge, huge success. But we need to see. Ultimately, Jens, is there anything left you'd like to add this evening?
Yeah, man. Again, last time we're gonna say this. Not saying that that a team is not gonna lose 3 games and win the Big 12. It's possible. Well, I'm just saying that the possibility of that happening, it's very possible. It's very possible. I might give it maybe a 30, maybe even a 40% chance of that happening, just because the competition, I think, in the Big 12, I think is going to be at an all-time high. I think it's going to be extremely competitive. I think that the major powers in that conference are all going to deal with issues very similar to each other. And it's big issues that you're going to have to try to replicate. Again, Oklahoma, with the amount of transfers that they were able to get, it's not going to be, again, from the first 2 to 3 games, again, it would not surprise me at all if you start to see some issues a little bit, only because that you're trying to get that rhythm. You're trying to, it's different from playing at a practice level than playing at real game time speed, right? When you're going against another team that's really trying to like take your light, that's trying to shut your lights out. So, I think that it's a little bit different there. So I think that each and every team, and I even said this last year with Alabama. When a lot of people thought that Henry T was going to be an All-American and was going to be an immediate first-round pick, I'm like, I don't know. Henry T, I think he can start, but if he's going to be the Mike, which I don't think he should be the Mike, I think he should be a weak side, but if he's going to be the Mike, he is going to have a little bit of trouble grasping this defense, because the way that he plays is way different from what what he played at Tennessee is going to be way different to how Pete Golding and Nick Saban is going to want him to play at Alabama. And what happened? He struggled. The first 5-6 games, struggled. He struggled grasping the defense. He struggled with making the calls. And then also, too, like, he had to be the person that had to be more engaged with the defense. With the offensive line. He's got to be extremely physical, which he lacked. He tried to run around a lot of players, which create these grasping holes. Hence why Florida almost rushed for 300 yards, and why we kind of struggled a little bit in that point. But once he made the adjustments, once everything was straight, you saw why a lot of people thought that he could be a first-round pick. So I'm saying that a lot of these teams in the Big 12 could potentially suffer through that same sort of situation, where you're going to see some certain teams struggle. Again, losing the amount of production that you had, that's not easy to replicate. And I know, just to mention a little bit earlier, there was a comment that when Oklahoma loses people, they replace them with better talent. That's not necessarily true, because look at that offensive line from last year. Oklahoma has been notoriously known for having really good offensive lines, top tier. Joe Moorhead, finals offensive lines.
They finished out the year good, but they certainly didn't start where they wanted to.
Yeah, they didn't start off well because the amount of production that they lost. It's not easy to always replicate it. Every single team, even Alabama went through those struggle pains with their defense a lot. So no team is successful. No team is, for the most part, susceptible to that sort of issue. So that's kind of just my point about it. Again, I have Oklahoma winning the Big 12. I think they're going to go 10-2 for the regular season. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they finish off bowl record and everything 12-2. But for the most part, again, I just addressing that point. It's not just saying that again a team's going to finish off 3 losses. It's just saying that the conference is going to be a lot more competitive. Each team is going to deal with similar issues. Each team are going to have their struggles. Texas, they're going to have to play Bama. Oklahoma's going to have to play Nebraska. Baylor's going to have to deal with the amount of lost production. Oklahoma State's going to have to deal with replacing their coaching regime and replacing the amount of experience. Kansas State, for the most part, has their issues. Each team will have their issues. And because the conference is so competitive, I just think that for the most part, it would not surprise me at all if a team does finish with 3 losses, but still ends up with the Big 12 winner.
Yeah, I think there was an air that when you said that they could finish with 3 losses, it would be because the conference is bad. And what we're saying is the exact opposite, chat. We're saying that so many teams are attempting to go through that work through stage that it's going to be way more competitive than we think a lot of people are giving the conference credit for. And we're almost going to see the conference cannibalize itself. Now, that being said, I do agree. I think right now, if you had to ask me who I think was the favorite to win the Big 12, I think it would probably be Oklahoma for me. I've been pretty consistent in that. I think from a standpoint of what they do have to replace, I do think that they don't have to replace quite as much. In the areas where they do have to replace, there's at least an answer that you have some level of confidence in, right? Like you lose a Benito, that's going to be hard to replace, but you have guys that they have some level of confidence in. So I do agree. I think Oklahoma is the team in the Big 12. Now, other than that, I was asked this right here. We have people talking about the Heisman. Way too early for Heisman conversations, but we have people asking if we think Dylan Gabriel can win the Heisman this year. I love Dylan Gabriel. I think he's a very talented quarterback, but I think it'd be very hard for a quarterback not named Bryce Young or CJ Stroud to win the Heisman this year because of especially CJ Stroud. I mean, you look at the firepower they're bringing back. But I mean, look, that's not a shot at Dillon Gabriel. I think Dillon Gabriel is extremely, extremely talented. I think that offense is going to be humming for Oklahoma, but we'll have to wait and see a little bit for Heisman. What are you thinking?
No, I don't see it. I don't really see it. Again, I like Dillon Gabriel a lot, but I think for the most part, if you're going to win the Heisman Trophy, you're going to have to put up some very, very special numbers. And I think looking at this offense, as much as I like Jeff Lebby and I like the principles that they're going to add, as far as adding on that Art Briles type style, I just don't really see it for them yet. I think Dillon Gabriel can put up some really, really good numbers. But I think that, again, I look at a CJ Stroud, I look at a Bryce Young, he's going to be in the conversation. I think for the most part, I think that Will Anderson could potentially be in the conversation. Maybe some other players could jump in it. I just feel like for the most part, there's going to be other players that I think can step up to the plate. I just don't really see Dillon Gabriel being that guy. And matter of fact, again, and really, for the most part, there's a lot of things, right? We look at statistics, we look at the level of competition that you played against. There's a lot of scenarios where Heisman voters, they love to consider as far as who can be that guy. For me, I just don't really see Dillon Gabriel being in that conversation.
Yeah, like I said, I love Dillon Gabriel. I think he's going to be one of the quarterbacks we look back on at the end of the year, and a lot of people are going to be sitting there like, man, how come I didn't know about Dillon Gabriel? I think he's going to play his way into a real big position, but you're talking about a CJ Stroud, right, who he's been in that system with those receivers for a year. Talking about Bryce Young, who he's been throwing to some of those receivers for a year with the same offensive coordinator. I mean, granted, Dillon Gabriel does reunite with Lebby, which he was unbelievable when he was with Lebby. And actually, Dillon Gabriel had his best rushing year before he got hurt last year. So that's an interesting fact as well. So he reunites with Lebby. That's going to be great. He's going to have better weapons than he's ever had at Oklahoma. So that'll lend itself to more success. But it's the continuity. How quick can that catch up? I have no reason to expect that it's not going to be great, but it's there. It's just going to be interesting to see. And I think it'd be a real far shot. Brandon asks about Caleb Williams. Look, Caleb Williams could be there, but I mean, there's no doubt Caleb Williams could be there, but man, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, as far as quarterbacks go, it's going to be very hard, man. They're going to be very good, right? I mean, we just look at what Bryce Young did last year, right? I mean, he was the most pressured, most sacked quarterback out of any of the major quarterbacks, and he still played in a national championship, still had Alabama in a position to win a national championship if things would have gone differently. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a great college football season, man. And Brandon, Jance isn't hating on Oklahoma. He picked Oklahoma to win, and he's been very high on Dillon Gabriel.
I mean, I'm about to say, I mean, I don't know. It is what it is. If hating on Oklahoma is choosing them to win the Big 12, and I've not said anything negative about their coaching staff or any of their players, but it is what it is. It is what it is, man.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm very excited, but I think we're going to get out of here. I need to go watch a movie. Jance, where can the people find you?
Yeah, guys, you guys can find me again on Twitter at Jan716. Again, YouTube channels, Jan Sports, for the most part, if you guys want to check out some of my content over there. Also Instagram, Jan Sports as well, if you want to hit me up there as well. And then again, Buffalo Fan Base Sports, check us out there. Tuesday, 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard, 6:00 Central Time. We talk about pretty much everything for the most part. And we also love to interact with the fans. We like to kind of bring on the fans on, and we like to talk to you guys about it, whether it's college, whether it's with pros, anything you guys want to talk about, we'll do that. So, yeah, man. But like I said, Ty, man, appreciate you for having me on once again, brother.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. You already know we do this it's not Monday. I was going to say we do this every Monday, but yeah, we do this all the time, and can't wait to be back, man. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll see y'all next time. That's it.